What if African nations stopped following the path the West has laid out for them? What if they chose their own way, even if that meant walking away from Western-style democracy? This question has sparked heated debate, especially around the bold and unexpected rise of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader of Burkina Faso. From the moment he took power through a military coup, critics, especially from the West, have rushed to label him a dictator. They say he silences voices, rejects democracy, and holds power without the people's vote. But these claims ignore a much deeper story. Traoré himself made it clear. Burkina Faso isn't just trading one system for another. His country isn't walking backward, nor is it copying the West. According to him, this is not about democracy or dictatorship. It's about leading a popular, progressive revolution that puts the people's survival and future above all else. So, the real question is, does Burkina Faso need a system the West approves of, or does it need a transformation that finally works for its own people? Let's take a closer look. On April 1st, 2025, Burkina Faso's military government gathered to mark the traditional flag-raising ceremony, but this year's event was more than just formal. It was on this day that President Ibrahim Traoré delivered a powerful speech that left a lasting impression on everyone who heard it. Right from the start, Traoré didn't hold back. He firmly called out his ministers and senior officials, reminding them that the first quarter of the year was coming to an end and pushing them to reflect on their work so far. He told them to measure what they had accomplished and to set new, clear goals for the months ahead. This moment showed just how serious and focused Traoré is about moving the country forward, not through empty words, but through real plans and action. Many of his critics, especially from abroad, love to point out that Traoré is a soldier, not a politician. They say he lacks experience in leadership just because he didn't rise to power through an election. But if you look at history, that argument falls apart. All over the world, including in Western countries, leaders have come to power through non-traditional means, and later helped their countries rebuild, sometimes even after military coups. Gabon is a nearby example, where the military is already laying the groundwork for a civilian government. The truth is, leadership has nothing to do with wearing a uniform or a suit. Even in the US, some presidents were businessmen before stepping into office. Being in the military doesn't disqualify someone from leading a nation, just like a university degree doesn't automatically make you a wise leader. Of course, leadership comes in many forms. Some people grab power for selfish reasons, only thinking about their own comfort and gain. But others are driven by a purpose, and they commit themselves fully to making life better for their people. Ibrahim Traoré seems to belong to this second group. His actions, decisions, and speeches all point toward one goal: freeing Burkina Faso from the cycle of insecurity, poverty, and underdevelopment that has held it back for too long. But not everyone is happy about the changes he's pushing through. His plans challenge the way things have always worked, both at home and abroad. And that's exactly why Traoré openly reminded the world of something important. Burkina Faso isn't just following the old rules of democracy, it's in the middle of a revolution. In one of his speeches, Traoré explained this clearly. He said Burkina Faso is not living in a democracy, but in a popular progressive revolution. He made it clear that real development doesn't start with democracy. In fact, democracy is the result of deeper changes, not the beginning of them. And if you stop and think, history backs him up. Look at the world's powerful countries today. Their growth didn't start with peaceful voting. It started with revolutions, bold decisions, and strong leaders who were not afraid to take risks. The US, France, even Rwanda, these countries had to fight to break free from systems that kept them down. Traoré's message hits especially hard for African nations, where so-called democracy has often gone hand in hand with poverty, foreign interference, and underdevelopment. Leaders have changed, but the people's struggles stayed the same. For true progress, Traoré argues, you first need a revolution, the kind that changes how things are done from the ground up. If you look at African heroes like Thomas Sankara, Nelson Mandela, or Paul Kagame, you'll see the same pattern. None of them waited for votes to act. They stepped forward during hard times, took tough decisions, and the people followed them when they saw real change. So when Traoré says Burkina Faso is in a revolution, not a democracy, he's talking about the kind of leadership that's willing to break old systems to build something new. It's a path that invites criticism, but if he stays committed to his vision, history might remember him as one of the leaders who changed the future of Africa, starting with his own country. If you look at history, big changes in any country almost never happen without struggle. Transformations usually come with sacrifice. People lose their lives. Leaders are sometimes jailed or even killed. That's the harsh reality of revolutions. They are rarely peaceful, but in the end, they often bring about the progress that people are fighting for. That's why President Traoré says Burkina Faso isn't walking the path of democracy, it's going through a revolution. During a recent speech, he made it clear that his government will keep working hard to educate and help the people understand this change. He also pointed out that too much focus on freedom of speech and freedom of action without responsibility only leads to chaos. If everyone speaks and acts however they want, society becomes unstable. This is a strong and clear message. Freedom of speech is often praised as a key part of democracy, but Traoré believes that real freedom also comes with respect and discipline. Without rules, freedom can quickly turn into disorder. Critics, especially supporters of Western-style democracy, say Traoré is limiting human rights. But the truth is, every society, no matter the system, is built on laws and limits. Nobody is completely free to do whatever they want. Traoré is reminding his people that rights always come with responsibility. This discussion grew louder after his government arrested a few journalists and shut down some foreign media outlets, including French and Western news channels. Some accused him of trying to silence the press. But Traoré has explained that he will not allow media platforms that promote extremist ideas or spread lies against the army, which is fighting hard to protect the country. Some call this censorship, but the same thing happens in countries like the United States. Just this year, the U.S. government moved to ban TikTok, claiming it was a security threat and that they needed to control the type of content reaching Americans. Last year, the U.S. also banned RT and some African news platforms. When the West does it, nobody questions it. But when Traoré does the same to protect Burkina Faso, people call it oppression. In reality, Traoré is simply doing what many world leaders do, guarding his country from harmful influences. Interestingly, this is the same accusation that was thrown at Thomas Sankara years ago. Critics claimed he limited free speech and silenced opposition, and these claims were used to turn his people against him, which ultimately led to his assassination. Traoré knows this history well and is determined not to let the same thing happen again. Many still believe that democracy is the perfect system for every country, but that isn't always true. Every nation has its own history, culture, and needs. Western leaders have pushed the world to believe that their way is the only right way. But in reality, even their democracies are often flawed. The idea of pure democracy barely exists in practice. Around the world, elections are influenced by money, power, and deals behind closed doors, not always by the will of the people. Politicians, whether in Africa or the West, often use their positions for personal gain or to climb the political ladder. And if you listened to President Biden's comments about China, you'd see how the West judges other systems. When asked if the Chinese president was a dictator, Biden answered in a way that showed he believes any country that doesn't follow the Western model is automatically seen as undemocratic or authoritarian. But honestly, that idea makes no sense. People often say the US has the biggest economy in the world, yet they call China a dictatorship. But when the US tried to ban TikTok, some Americans switched to a Chinese app called Red Note. And what they saw and heard from real Chinese users showed that much of what their own government had told them about China wasn't true at all. The US government had long claimed that the Chinese people live under heavy control, with no freedom or rights, especially when it comes to free speech. But when Americans spoke directly to Chinese citizens, they found no clear signs of this. The truth is, just because Americans can say and do almost anything, doesn't mean every country without that level of freedom is doing something wrong. In fact, many Americans came to realize that the Chinese who were supposed to be oppressed were living safer, more stable lives with a stronger economy and better social conditions than many people in so-called free countries. Now ask yourself, which would you choose? A peaceful, secure country with good schools, hospitals, and jobs, or unlimited freedom to say whatever you like while living in poverty, fear, and chaos? If you asked most Africans, they would choose the first option without thinking twice. What's the use of free speech if half the population can't afford healthy food, clean water, or safe shelter? How useful is freedom when armed groups and terrorists can use the same right to free speech to spread their ideas, recruit followers, and show off their crimes on social media? That's exactly what's happening today. These violent groups are using websites and platforms to share their messages, promote fear, and recruit new fighters. And that, in the name of democracy and freedom of expression, seems totally absurd, doesn't it? Even after decades of so-called democracy, Africa has little to show for it. Instead of progress, many African nations face political fights, civil wars, insecurity, slow growth, and widespread corruption. Leaders who are meant to step down after their time in office often rewrite the rules so they can stay longer. Elections are often rigged, and voters end up with leaders they never actually chose. But every time an African election goes ahead without violence, the West calls it a win for democracy, even if everyone knows the vote wasn't fair. After Africa's colonial rulers, Britain, France, and Belgium, finally pulled out around 1960, most African countries didn't start off with multi-party systems like in the West. Instead, they adopted single-party systems where one political group controlled the government. The West saw this as dictatorship, but African leaders had different ideas. Tanzania's Julius Nyerere believed one-party rule made more sense for Africa because it was closer to the way African communities traditionally solved problems through unity rather than division. Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah also believed that a multi-party system would split people apart when newly independent countries needed to stick together and work as one. But over time, many of these one-party systems turned into harsh regimes that ignored the needs of smaller ethnic groups. By the time communism started collapsing worldwide at the end of the Cold War, the West began openly criticizing these African governments for their economic troubles. But was that fair? Africa had barely recovered from over 50 years of colonial rule, so of course the continent needed time to rebuild and grow. The word democracy is supposed to mean a government where people choose their own leaders and those leaders work for the people. But in Africa, that idea rarely matches reality. Many African politicians use money, threats, or lies to win votes. Sometimes they bribe election officials or send gangs to polling stations to scare voters or disrupt the process. The hard truth is, in many African countries, the people's vote isn't what puts their leaders in power. More often, it's manipulation, bribery, and fear. Most African leaders aren't really chosen by the people, they are often forced onto them. Free and fair elections are more of a dream than a reality. A clear example of this was Nigeria's 2023 election. Many Nigerians believed Peter Obi, from the Labour Party, was the leader they voted for. But in the end, Bola Tinubu, the man with deep pockets and powerful connections, was declared the winner. The sad truth about democracy in Africa is that once a leader wins an election, they are given almost unlimited power. Even if a person is unqualified for a top position, the president can hire or fire them at will. This is one of the main reasons Africa struggles to move forward. Worse still, democracy has allowed leaders to use their power to favor their own ethnic group and grow their personal wealth, often leaving others behind. In fact, many of the civil wars across Africa started this way. What's shocking is that the West knows all this. But as long as a country holds elections and announces a winner, Western nations call it a democracy, even if the country is suffering. It's hard not to wonder if there's a hidden reason behind the West's push for democracy in Africa. Some believe that under this system, it's easier for outside powers to control or pressure African leaders compared to other forms of government, like China's model. The truth is, while democracy has worked in Europe and the West, it hasn't fit well in Africa. That's because Africa was built on strong communities, teamwork, and shared responsibility. In the West, people are taught to focus on the individual. But before colonization, Africa had well-structured systems of government that worked and outlasted even powerful rulers. The Oyo Empire, the Ashanti Empire, the Hausa Fulani, the Benin Kingdom, and the Ghana Empire all had their own way of ruling systems that supported stability and growth. Even today, in places like the Benin Kingdom, traditional leadership structures still stand strong, showing that power doesn't always sit with just one man. Africans had their own version of democracy long before the West arrived. The Ashanti Empire was run like a republic. In Ethiopia, the Oromo people used a local voting system called Gada to choose their leaders. The Igbo people used a community-based democracy where decisions were made together. The real problem began when European colonizers carved Africa into pieces, mixing ethnic groups with different traditions and rules into one country. After that, they expected these groups to live under one leader, usually from just one tribe. This is why democracy often struggles in Africa. Take Nigeria, for example, a country with over 250 ethnic groups and many religions. Expecting such a diverse population to unite under one political system designed by outsiders is simply unrealistic. African countries need to stop copying Western models and create systems that suit their own history, culture, and values. The truth is, for too long, Africa has looked to the West for solutions to its problems, and it hasn't worked. So the question is, isn't it time Africa took a different path? Isn't it time African nations started solving their own problems their own way? As the saying goes, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a new result is madness. That's why leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré are thinking outside the box. His approach is different, and maybe it's the kind of change other African countries need too. What's your take on this? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.